Hello, I'm John Adams, editor of Digital Photo, and welcome to this video lesson where we're going to talk about levels. This is a truly fantastic command. Any problems with contrast or color in your images, and 90% of the time you can sort them out using this one amazing palette. In a nutshell, what levels does, it allows you to turn a shot like this, which is looking rather washed out, lacking in contrast, a bit cool in its color balance, and it allows you to turn it into something like this. Full of contrast, the right kind of color balance, and a result much more in keeping with the scene I experienced out in the Mojave Desert, this particular shot. So that's one of the great things levels can do for your pictures. But before we go into the nitty-gritty and actually work through this tutorial and use the levels palette, there's a few things I want to try and explain first. So I'll take this shot back to its starting point. Then what I'm going to do is load up a couple of graphics, just as illustrations for what levels actually does. So I'm just going to bring in this one. I'll make that a bit smaller on screen. There we go. Then we'll bring in this one as well, and I'll do the same with that. Just take it down in size a touch. There we go. So we've got two images, two black and white pictures, simple graphics. If we make sure that one's selected, I'm going to now open the levels palette by using the command Control and L. What we have here is our histogram. This is a graph that represents all the pixels in our image. We've got black over on the left-hand side and we've got white over on the right-hand side. And these sliders underneath the histogram can be moved to affect the contrast in the picture. Now, because we've got black in this image, we see a line extending saying there are all the black pixels stacked up. We also have white, and we have a line here saying these are all the white pixels stacked up. So that's fine. We have black, we have white, but now let's just come out of this and we'll go to the other image, which also contains black and white. And let's open the levels palette on this one. Control and L will open it up, and there we have it. We've got a black line and a white line. It's exactly the same, because both images have got the same proportion of black and white pixels within them. So what levels tells us is simply what tones are present in the picture. It doesn't tell us how they're arranged or how they're distributed or how the picture's composed. It just tells us it's got black in it and it's got white in it. And because our two lines are level, we also know that we have an equal amount of both. So levels doesn't tell us whether a picture is overexposed or underexposed or well composed or badly framed. It just tells us what tones are in the picture. Okay, so let's move away from there for a second. I'll close these down and we'll go back to our original picture. Now, if we hit that Control and L command to open up levels, there's our levels palette, quite a large palette. And instead of black and white squares, we've of course got a proper image. And there's our distribution of tones in the picture. Over on the left, we've got nothing at all. That means there's no black in the picture. It doesn't start until about this point here. Over on the right, we don't have any whites either. They start about here, the brightest tones. And because we have gaps at either end of this histogram, that's why the picture looks washed out. There are no black or white tones within it. So when we look at the histogram in conjunction with the image, we know that we need to do some work on the contrast. And provided RGB is selected in the channel box here, we will only affect the contrast in the image when we move these sliders around. So the first thing we're going to do is make sure we've got a full range of tones, and we'll start with the blacks. So let's just, I'll move that up here. There we go. What we're going to do is grab hold of the shadow slider here, a little black triangle, and we're going to move it inwards. And as we move it inwards, we get more and more black tones in the image appearing until we get too dark. So what we want to do is make sure that our darkest tones are pure black. So if we move that just to meet the graph, and I think something around there looks pretty good. I've got about 32 set there. We've got a few pixels to the left of it, but what moving that slider achieves is it makes these very dark grey pixels come out as black. There they are as dark grey, and there they are as black. So setting of around about 32, basically where the slider meets the graph. That's what you want to set a black point. Now at the other end of the scale, we've got no white tones present under the white slider, so we have to move that in, and the brighter tones will then brighten up even more in the image until we set a white point. If you go too far, you'll lose detail, because we're telling these 3/4 grey tones to be pure white, and that's going to bleach out and make a horrible mess of our picture. So again, we just want to get it to meet the edge of the graph. And in this example here, I think I'm going to go for, it's about there, about 221. And that means that our very brightest tones in the scene, these ones here, go to pure white. So that's all good. We also have this midtone slider. Its default value is 1.00, but we can move it to the left or right to see how it impacts the image. Now, if we move it to the left, we get a much brighter exposure. If we move it to the right, we get a much darker exposure. And how you set your midtone slider really depends on your own personal preference and the kind of look you want for your image. So I'm going to take it slightly to the dark side. I think about, somewhere around there, somewhere in the mid-70s. And that gives me a nice, rich-looking image. We know we have a full range of tones because our levels palette says so, and we've adjusted the midtones to suit our own taste. And I've got that nice, bold sky coming through and some nice punchy tones. Now that's great, that may be where you want to stop, but the other thing Levels does is it can control colour. If we click in this box here that says RGB, we can choose either the red, the green or the blue channel that makes up the image. These three things, red, green and blue, they're the primary colours of light and the primary colours of digital imaging. And various mixtures of the three can give you up to 16.7 million different colours. So we've got plenty of variation we can get from just these three channels. What I'm going to do is select the red channel. And now when I move the midtone slider, I can get more or less red in the picture. Now less red is cyan, so moving it to the right will give me a cyan colour cast to the image. Moving it to the left will give me a red colour cast. Now we're rather extreme at the moment, so I'm only going to move it a little distance, so I'm going to take it a touch towards red, and I think something like that looks like plenty. Yeah, I've got about 1.19, maybe 1.2 I'll go for. And that gives a red toned wash over the image. Now to warm up a scene, you need to apply an amber colour cast to it. So to get an amber coloured mix, we need to use another colour, and that colour is blue. So if we select blue from the channel box, we can move that same slider to the left or right to affect the amount of blue or the opposite of blue, which is yellow. So if we move it in the opposite direction, over to the right, we start to introduce yellow tones into the scene. And we can make that quite extreme, or we can make it quite tame. And we need to be fairly tame with this so we don't break the image. And I'm going to take that to somewhere around 0.90, something like that. And then using the preview button, we can toggle on and off the effect we've created before we accept our changes. So let's move that just out the way a bit. There we go. If I turn the preview off, we see how the image looked before we applied our levels changes. And you can see it looks awful. It's washed out, very cold in tone. Turn it back on again. That's our levels changes. And there's our punchy contrast and our warm-up filter applied, all using one simple palette. And before you click OK, you can also go back to your RGB and change your contrast, or you can jump into your different color channels and change the color mix as well. But once you're happy and you're pretty sure that that's a much better look, and I think it is, all you have to do is click OK and those changes will be processed. And the result of using levels is you have a full range of tones and a much better looking image. It's an incredibly powerful palette and one that's a fundamental Photoshop tool for making big improvements to your pictures. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.